It started as just another shift. Emily rushed through the restaurant, balancing a tray of drinks in one hand and a notepad in the other. The dinner rush was in full swing, and she barely had a second to breathe. The fryer was beeping, a kid was screaming at table 7, and table 12 was waving for the check. Just another night. Just another long, exhausting shift. She slid a plate of pasta in front of a man at table 5. He gave her a polite nod, but his eyes held something else, something observant, like he was studying everything around him. Not the usual rushed, distracted customers she saw every day. Emily didn't have time to think about it. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said quickly before moving on. The man was just another customer, or so she thought. What Emily didn't know was that the man wasn't just any diner. He was Daniel Carter, the CEO of the very restaurant chain she worked for. Tonight he wasn't here as an executive. He was here undercover. Dressed in a simple button-down and jeans, he looked like any other customer. His goal was simple: observe how his company really ran from the ground level. Numbers and reports only told part of the story. If he wanted to understand what was happening in his restaurants, he needed to see it for himself. And from what he had seen so far, Emily was one of the hardest-working employees on the floor. She barely stopped moving, covering for others, handling customer complaints with patience, and keeping her composure even when things got chaotic. But something else caught his attention. There was a heaviness in her movements, a tiredness that went deeper than just a long shift. She smiled at customers, laughed when a coworker made a joke, but the second she thought no one was looking, that smile disappeared. Daniel had seen it before, people pushing through exhaustion because they had no other choice. It made him curious. Who was Emily, and what was she carrying? By the time the shift was winding down, Emily was cleaning up near the bar when Daniel waved her over. "Everything okay?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Daniel hesitated. He had spoken to employees before, countless times in boardrooms, during training meetings, at corporate events. But this was different. "I just wanted to say," he started, "you're really good at what you do." Emily blinked, caught off guard. Compliments from customers weren't rare, but something about the way he said it felt different. "Thanks," she said. "Just trying to keep things running." "Do you like working here?" Daniel asked. She exhaled, glancing around as if making sure no one else could hear. "It's a job," she admitted. "Pays the bills." Daniel nodded. He had heard that answer before too. "And outside of work," he pressed. "What's life like?" Emily hesitated. Normally she wouldn't have answered, but something about the stranger's voice, genuine, not just making small talk, made her pause. "I have a son," she said finally. 5 years old, he's my whole world." Daniel watched as her expression softened. But then just as quickly the exhaustion returned. "Things have been tough lately," she continued. "Car trouble, bills stacking up, just trying to keep it all together." She let out a small laugh, but it wasn't really funny. "You ever feel like no matter how hard you work, you're still treading water?" Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew that feeling. He had lived that feeling before climbing to where he was now. But for some people, hard work alone wasn't enough, and Emily was one of them. That night, Daniel sat in his hotel room thinking. He had come here to observe, to take notes, to analyze, but now he couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her confession had been small, casual, just an offhand remark to a stranger she thought she'd never see again. But it stuck with him because it wasn't fair. Emily was breaking her back to support her son, and yet life kept throwing obstacles in her way. She wasn't asking for a handout. She was just trying to survive. Daniel had spent years running a company, making decisions from boardrooms, approving policies that affected thousands of employees. But when was the last time he had actually changed someone's life directly? Maybe this was his chance. The next morning, Daniel made some calls. He had an idea. A plan, something that would actually make a difference. But first, he needed to see Emily one more time. Emily arrived for her next shift, exhausted as always, but ready to power through. What she didn't expect was to see the man from table 5 standing by the entrance. This time he wasn't dressed like a regular customer. He was wearing a suit, and he wasn't alone. Next to him stood the restaurant's regional manager and 2 other higher-ups she had only seen in meetings. "Emily," the manager said with a smile. "Can we talk?" Her stomach flipped. Was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong? She nodded hesitantly and followed them to a quieter area. Then the man from table 5 stepped forward. "Emily," he said, "my name is Daniel Carter. I'm the CEO of this company." Her breath caught. The CEO, the actual CEO. "I came here undercover to see how things were running," Daniel continued. "And while I saw a lot, what stood out to me the most was you." Emily's heart pounded. What was happening? "You work hard," Daniel said. "You take care of your team, you take care of your customers, and most importantly, you take care of your son." Emily swallowed hard. She had no idea where this was going. "And I want to take care of you," Daniel finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. Emily stared, confused. "This is for you," he said. "A brand new car, fully paid for. No more breakdowns, no more stress. Just something to make life a little easier." Silence. For a second, Emily thought she had misheard. Her brain struggled to process the words. A car. For her. Her hands covered her mouth, and suddenly tears were blurring her vision. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. I can't." "Yes, you can," Daniel said firmly. "You've earned this, and honestly, it's the least I can do." The room was quiet except for the sound of Emily's quiet sobs. She had spent years fighting, struggling, pushing through. And now, for the first time, someone had seen her, really seen her. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Emily gripped the keys in her hand, her fingers trembling. The weight of what had just happened hadn't fully sunk in. It didn't feel real. She had walked into work expecting just another shift, another long, exhausting night balancing plates and bills, another night pushing through for her son. Instead, she was standing in the middle of the restaurant, the CEO of the company in front of her, handing her a brand new car. A car. She had spent months patching up her old one, praying it would make it through another week. She had drained what little savings she had into repairs, just to keep it running long enough to get to work and drop Liam off at school. And now, Emily. Daniel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up, eyes still wet. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said simply. "Just take it. You deserve it." The regional manager, the other executives, they were all watching, smiling, nodding like they had been in on this the whole time. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to believe this was real. That this wasn't some kind of cruel joke. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. Daniel tilted his head. "Because I see how hard you work. I see how much you care. And because sometimes people who give everything to others deserve to get something back." Emily let out a short, breathy laugh, still in disbelief. I don't even know how to thank you." "You already have," Daniel said. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Coworkers whispered excitedly. A few customers had caught the moment and congratulated her as she moved between tables. Even the kitchen staff, who rarely had time for anything beyond orders and complaints, clapped her on the back and cheered for her. Emily had never been the center of attention like this before. It felt overwhelming, but beneath the shock, something else settled in her chest. Relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she didn't have to worry about whether her car would start in the morning. She didn't have to dread the next unexpected repair, the next financial setback. She could just breathe. When she got home that night, Liam was already asleep. She tiptoed into his room, crouching by his bed, watching his little chest rise and fall. He looked peaceful, oblivious to how close she had come to breaking down just a few days ago. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Mommy got a new car today," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Things are gonna be a little easier now." She hadn't cried since the moment in the restaurant, But now, sitting here in the quiet, it finally hit her. Silent tears slipped down her face, not tears of stress, not tears of frustration, tears of relief. The next morning she took Liam outside to see the car. His eyes went wide. "Mommy, that's ours." She laughed, nodding. "Yeah, buddy, no more getting stuck on the side of the road." He ran to the passenger door, pulling at the handle. "Can we go for a drive? Can we go to the park?" Emily smiled, pulling him into a hug. "Yeah, we can go wherever you want." She strapped him into his booster seat, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something full of possibility. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter sat in his office, scrolling through his emails. He had done a lot of things as CEO, launched initiatives, expanded locations, pushed for new policies, but nothing had felt quite as impactful as yesterday. Giving Emily that car hadn't just been about rewarding a hardworking employee. It had been about something bigger. It made him think. How many other employees were struggling? How many other Emilys were out there, barely making ends meet, working themselves to exhaustion just to keep going? The restaurant industry was built on people like her, people who worked tirelessly, who gave their all, who often went unnoticed. Maybe it was time that changed. Maybe he could do more. He tapped his fingers against the desk, an idea forming. What if this wasn't just a one-time thing? What if he could do something bigger? Something that could change more lives. Later that day, Daniel made another visit, this time to the corporate office. He walked straight into the boardroom where a few executives were preparing for a meeting. "I want to talk about something," he said, setting his phone down on the table. They looked up, curious. Daniel took a breath. "I think it's time we start really taking care of our employees." Emily wasn't thinking about corporate policies or boardroom discussions. She was too busy enjoying the rare feeling of peace. She had the day off, and for once she wasn't spending it stressing over her car or how she was going to get to work. She took Liam to the park, then stopped for ice cream. It was a simple day, but it was a good day, and for now that was enough. She had no idea that her life was about to change even more, that this one act of kindness was only the beginning, that somewhere in a corporate office miles away, a decision was being made that would affect not just her but hundreds, maybe even thousands of employees just like her. And soon, she was going to find out. Emily had spent most of her life expecting things to stay the same. No miracles, no sudden changes, just the daily grind, pushing through one day at a time. But ever since she was handed the keys to that car, something had shifted. At first, it was just little things. The way her coworkers looked at her differently, like she was some kind of symbol of hope. The way customers who had been in the restaurant that day now recognized her, smiling and congratulating her. But then, something even bigger happened. One evening, while finishing up her shift, she noticed a buzz of conversation between the managers. They were unusually tense, whispering in the back of the kitchen, sneaking glances at the employees. It wasn't until her shift ended that she found out why. "Emily, wait up," Mark, the general manager, called out. She turned, still tying her apron around her waist. "Yeah. There's someone who wants to talk to you." She frowned. "Who?" Mark hesitated, then stepped aside. And that's when she saw him, Daniel Carter, the CEO. Not in disguise this time, not pretending to be someone else, just himself. Emily's breath caught in her throat. He had already given her so much. "Why was he back? Mind if we talk?" Daniel asked. She swallowed, nodding. "Of course." He motioned to a booth in the empty section of the restaurant. As they sat, Emily tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I know this is unexpected," Daniel started, "but after what happened with you, I realized something." She tilted her head, waiting. "You're not the only one struggling. There are so many employees out there, single parents, caretakers, students, people who work their hardest just to scrape by. And most of the time, no one even notices them." Emily nodded. She knew what that felt like. Daniel leaned forward. I don't want that to be the case anymore. I want to change things. Emily listened carefully. What happened to you made me realize that we, as a company, need to do more, so I want to start something new. A program, one that recognizes hardworking employees and gives them the help they need, whether that's financial support, transportation, scholarships, or something else entirely. Emily's eyes widened. You mean like what you did for me, but for others? Exactly, Daniel said. But I don't just want to guess who needs help. I want employees themselves to have a voice in this. I want to hear their stories. I want them to have a chance to ask for help without fear. Emily nodded slowly. That could change a lot of lives. That's the goal, Daniel said, and I want you to be part of it. Emily blinked. Me. You're the reason this started, and I think your perspective, your story, could help shape what this becomes. She wasn't sure what to say. She had always been the one struggling, the one just trying to survive. Now, suddenly, she had a chance to help others like her. The thought sent a wave of emotion through her. But what could I even do? She asked. Daniel smiled. We'll figure that out together. The next week was a whirlwind. Emily still worked her regular shifts, but now she was also having meetings with Daniel, with managers, with corporate teams who were figuring out how to implement the new initiative. They called it the Employee Impact Program. The idea was simple. Employees could submit their stories, either about themselves or about coworkers they believed deserved help. Each month, selected employees would receive life-changing support, whether it was paying off debt, providing childcare assistance, or even funding career advancement opportunities. The more Emily learned, the more she realized how much this could matter. She thought about coworkers who had picked up extra shifts just to afford rent. She thought about the dishwasher who had been walking to work every day because his car broke down months ago. She thought about herself, before the car, before everything. And she knew this program was something real, something that could actually change things. The first round of submissions came in faster than anyone expected. Hundreds of employees shared their stories. Some were heartbreaking, some were inspiring. And as Emily read through them, she realized how many people had been suffering in silence. Then came the hardest part, choosing who would be helped first. Emily sat in a boardroom with Daniel and a small team, reviewing applications. This one, she said, sliding forward a letter. It was from a line cook named Maria, a mother of 3, working 2 jobs to keep her kids fed. Her youngest son had medical issues, and most of her paycheck went straight to hospital bills. Daniel read over it, nodding. She deserves this. By the end of the day, they had chosen 5 employees to receive life-changing support. Emily couldn't wait to tell them. Maria broke down in tears when she found out. You mean you're paying for my son's medical expenses? She asked, voice trembling. Emily smiled. Yes. You don't have to worry anymore. Maria covered her face with her hands, sobbing, and at that moment, Emily knew. She had never felt this kind of fulfillment before. She had spent years just surviving. Now she was part of something bigger, something that was giving people hope. And for the first time, she realized this was only the beginning. Emily had always believed in hard work. It was how she had survived, how she had provided for her son, how she had managed to keep going even when things felt impossible. But now, for the first time, she was seeing something she had never seen before. She was seeing the power of change. The Employee Impact Program had only just begun, and already it was making waves. The stories of the first recipients, Maria, the dishwasher who had been walking to work, the single father who had been drowning in medical debt, had spread throughout the company like wildfire. Employees who had once felt invisible suddenly felt seen, and for Emily that meant everything. The day after Maria received her life-changing news, Emily arrived at work early. She had barely slept, her mind racing with ideas, questions, and possibilities for what was next. She was still adjusting to her new role, balancing work at the restaurant while also helping develop the program. Daniel had given her the option to leave her server position entirely and work full-time with corporate, but she had refused. She wasn't ready to leave just yet. Not when this restaurant had been her home for so long. Not when she still had unfinished business. She was wiping down a table when she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned and saw Rachel, the shift supervisor. Rachel had always been professional, efficient, and, if Emily was honest, a little intimidating. But right now she looked hesitant. "Hey," Rachel said, shifting her weight. "Hey," Emily replied. There was a pause, then Rachel sighed. "Can I ask you something?" Emily set down her rag. "Of course." Rachel hesitated, then spoke in a quieter voice. "That program. The one you're working on with corporate. Does it only help people who are really struggling, like at rock bottom?" Emily frowned. "No, it's for anyone who needs support." "Why?" Rachel swallowed, looking away. Emily had never seen her like this before. Then, after a long pause, Rachel finally said, "I'm struggling too." The words hit Emily harder than she expected. Rachel always seemed so put together, so in control, but now standing here she looked tired, worn down. Emily softened. "Tell me." Rachel hesitated, then let out a breath. I haven't told anyone, but I've been working doubles for the past 3 months. Not because I want to, but because I have to." Emily listened carefully. "My dad's sick," Rachel continued. "He was diagnosed last year and the medical bills are insane. My mom, she's doing her best, but she doesn't make much. I've been sending them half my paycheck every week just to help keep them afloat." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Rachel rubbed her temple. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm exhausted." "But quitting isn't an option. If I don't work, they don't survive." Emily didn't hesitate. "You need to apply," she said. Rachel blinked. "What?" "You need to apply to the program right now." Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "Emily, I run this place. People rely on me. I can't just—" "Rachel," Emily looked her in the eye, "you just said it yourself. You can't keep doing this. So let someone help you for once." Rachel looked away, jaw tightening, but Emily saw it, the way her hands trembled, the way her shoulders slumped. She was tired. And she needed this. Rachel let out a slow breath. "I'll think about it." Emily nodded. "Okay, just promise me you will." Rachel hesitated. Then finally she gave a small nod. And for the first time in months, she looked like she had hope. Later that night, Emily met with Daniel over a video call. "We've got more applications coming in than we expected," Daniel said, scrolling through documents on his screen. "It's overwhelming, but it's a good problem to have." Emily nodded. People are finally realizing they don't have to suffer in silence. Daniel looked at her, a small smile forming. "And that's because of you." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, but she wasn't done yet. "There's one more person who needs help," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Rachel," Emily said. "Our shift supervisor." She explained everything, Rachel's father, the endless doubles, the quiet desperation in her voice. Daniel listened, nodding slowly. "She hasn't applied yet," Emily admitted, "but I think she will." Daniel exhaled. "Then we'll be ready." A week passed. Rachel didn't mention the program again. But then one morning, Emily walked into the back office and saw a folded paper sitting on the desk. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Rachel had applied, and now it was Emily's turn to fight for her. The next round of selections came quickly. Once again, the boardroom was filled with stories, employees who needed help, people who had given their all and still found themselves struggling. Emily sat beside Daniel, scanning the applications. Then, finally, she saw Rachel's name. She held her breath as Daniel read over the form. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "She's in." Relief flooded through Emily. Rachel was going to get help. She wasn't going to have to carry this burden alone anymore. The day Rachel found out, she didn't say anything at first. She just stared at Emily as if waiting for her to say it was a joke. Then, slowly, her lips trembled, and before Emily could react, Rachel pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. Emily squeezed her back. "You deserve this." For the first time in a long time, Rachel let herself cry. And Emily knew this was why she was here. This was why it all mattered. And this was only the beginning. Rachel stood outside the restaurant, gripping her phone in one hand, the other shaking at her side. She had just gotten off the call. The official call, the one that confirmed it was real. Her father's medical bills gone, not reduced, not delayed. Completely paid off. The relief was so overwhelming that she had to sit down on the curb, pressing a hand against her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. She had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering how much longer she could hold out, how much more she could sacrifice before her body finally gave in. And now, it was over. For the first time in months, Rachel didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she could breathe. Inside, Emily was watching from the window. She didn't want to intrude. This was Rachel's moment. But seeing the way her friend sat there, shoulders shaking with silent emotion, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Rachel had been the strongest person in the room for so long. Now, finally, she was allowed to be vulnerable. Emily's phone buzzed. It was Daniel. She stepped away from the window and answered. Hey, Daniel's voice came through. Just wanted to check in, you okay? Emily hesitated. Yeah, just taking it all in. Daniel chuckled. It's a lot, isn't it? You have no idea, Emily muttered, but she knew Daniel did understand. He had created this program for a reason, and now it was growing into something neither of them had expected. Daniel's voice softened. You're doing good work, Emily. Emily exhaled, a small smile forming. Thanks, she said, but I think we're just getting started. A week passed. Rachel was a different person. She still worked hard, of course she did, that was just who she was, but the exhaustion in her eyes was gone. She even laughed more. Real, genuine laughter, and Emily couldn't have been happier. But then something unexpected happened. More employees started coming to her. It was subtle at first, casual questions about the program, curiosity about how it worked. Then the questions became more personal. Do you think I'd qualify? I don't know if my situation is bad enough to apply, but I don't want to take this away from someone who needs it more. But things have been really tough lately. Emily listened to every single one. And with each conversation, she realized just how many people were still suffering in silence. The program had helped a few, but there were so many more, and she wasn't about to stop now. One evening, Emily sat across from Daniel in his office. She had requested the meeting, and now, as she sat there, she felt the weight of what she was about to say. Daniel leaned back in his chair. All right, I can tell you've been thinking about something. Lay it on me. Emily took a deep breath. The program isn't big enough. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Emily pressed forward. It's working, we've seen that. But right now it's only reaching a handful of employees. We need to expand. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. I want to expand it, Emily, but you know the reality. Budgeting, approvals, it's not that simple. Emily met his gaze. What if we make it their decision? Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Emily leaned forward. What if, instead of corporate deciding who gets help, we let the employees nominate each other? Daniel's expression shifted, like he was seeing something unfold in his mind. Emily continued. People don't always ask for help, but their coworkers see them. They see who's struggling. If we open it up for nominations, we could reach the people who need it most, even the ones who are too afraid to come forward. Daniel was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. You might be onto something, he admitted. Emily felt her heart race. So we try it, Daniel exhaled, then smiled. Let's try it. The next day, the announcement was made. A new phase of the program. This time, anyone could submit a nomination. No application for themselves. No awkward requests for help. Just one simple question. Who in this company deserves support? And the responses poured in. A week later, Emily sat in the corporate boardroom, going through the nominations. There were hundreds. Employees writing about their coworkers, their friends, their mentors. Some were heartbreaking. She's been taking care of her sick brother and still comes to work every day with a smile. He's the hardest worker I know, but his car broke down last month and now he's struggling just to get here. She hasn't said anything, but I know she's been skipping meals to afford rent. She needs this more than anyone. Emily wiped her eyes, overwhelmed. She looked at Daniel. How do we pick? She whispered. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we don't pick just one. Emily's breath caught. Daniel tapped his pen against the desk. We expand the budget. We help as many as we can. Emily exhaled, a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel just smiled. Let's change some lives. The next round of recipients was bigger than anything they had done before. It wasn't just one employee. It was 10 lives, 10 people who had been struggling in silence, 10 people who now had a weight lifted off their shoulders, and the impact was immediate. The restaurant felt different. People were talking about it, and for the first time there was a sense of hope in the air. Emily watched it all unfold, feeling something deep inside her shift. This wasn't just a program anymore. It was a movement, and she wasn't stopping now. That night, as she closed up the restaurant, Rachel walked over to her. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "You're really doing something special, you know that." Emily smiled. "I had help." Rachel rolled her eyes, but there was warmth there. Then she did something Emily hadn't expected. She pulled out a small envelope and handed it to her. Emily frowned. "What's this?" Rachel shrugged. "Just read it later." Emily took it, tucking it into her pocket. Rachel smirked. "See you tomorrow, boss." And with that, she walked away. Emily stood there for a moment, then pulled out the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. It had only 4 words. "You changed my life." Emily clutched the paper, her vision blurring. She exhaled. And then, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel it. Not just the exhaustion, not just the responsibility, but the joy. She had changed someone's life. And tomorrow she'd do it again. The momentum was unstoppable. Word had spread far beyond their restaurant. Other locations, different businesses, even local news stations started picking up on what was happening. Employees weren't just showing up for work anymore. They were showing up for each other. Something had changed, and Emily knew it was only the beginning. But not everyone was happy about it. She sat across from a senior executive, someone from corporate she hadn't interacted with much before. His name was Mark Holloway, and he had the kind of presence that made rooms feel colder. "This program is drawing attention," Mark said, folding his hands in front of him. "A lot of attention." Emily nodded. "That's a good thing, isn't it?" Mark studied her for a long moment. "That depends." She frowned. "On what?" "On whether or not this attention is sustainable." Emily sat up straighter. "We're helping people." Mark didn't blink. "We're running a business." The words hit like a slap. She clenched her fists under the table. "With respect, sir, those aren't mutually exclusive." Mark exhaled, his expression unreadable. "Emily, let me be clear. I don't dislike what you're doing. I admire initiative, but I have to consider the long-term impact. Right now, this program is a cost, and costs require justification." Emily's pulse quickened. "So what are you saying?" Mark tapped a single finger against the table. "I'm saying I need proof. If this is going to continue, if we're going to expand it further, I need tangible results." Emily gritted her teeth. "You want numbers." "I want numbers," Mark confirmed. "Show me why this works. Show me why we should keep investing in it, otherwise." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. Emily had a deadline. She left the meeting feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear, not fear of failure. Not exactly. Fear that something good could be taken away before it had the chance to reach its full potential. She had seen what this program did for people. She had seen the hope it sparked. And now she had to prove it was worth something. not just emotionally, financially. For the next week, Emily buried herself in research. She combed through every metric she could get her hands on. Employee retention rates, productivity shifts, customer satisfaction scores. She built spreadsheets, tracked numbers, compiled testimonials. She stayed up later than she should have, drank more coffee than was probably healthy. But she wasn't doing it for herself. She was doing it for them, for Rachel, for the others who had written anonymous nominations, hoping their coworkers would get the help they needed, for the people who had stopped believing good things could happen, until now. She would make this work. She had to. A week later, she sat in front of Mark again, only this time she wasn't nervous. She was ready. She slid a file across the table. "Everything you asked for," she said, "and then some." Mark opened it. Inside were hard numbers, proof of increased employee retention, higher customer satisfaction, improved workplace morale. But there was something else too, a separate folder. Testimonials, Mark murmured, flipping through it. Emily nodded. From employees and customers. People notice when a company cares about its workers, and when they notice, they return. Mark scanned a few pages, his brow furrowing slightly. She could tell he was processing, calculating. Then he closed the folder, and he did something unexpected. He smiled. "Well," he said, leaning back, "I'll be damned." Emily blinked. "Excuse me." Mark tapped the folder. "You proved it." The weight in Emily's chest lightened slightly. "So does that mean," Mark exhaled, "I'll approve continued funding," and he hesitated. "I'll push for expansion." Emily's breath caught. "Are you serious?" Mark nodded. "This is bigger than just one restaurant. If we're going to do this, we're going all in." Emily couldn't believe it. She had won. No, they had won. The next phase rolled out faster than anyone expected. Corporate backed the program officially. More locations implemented it, and Emily saw firsthand the scale of what was happening. Lives were changing, not just in her restaurant, everywhere. And the best part, it wasn't just a corporate initiative anymore. Employees were taking ownership. They were nominating. They were supporting. They were caring. Emily had never seen anything like it, and she knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. The impact of the program was undeniable. Months passed, and what had started as a simple, anonymous nomination system in a single restaurant had evolved into something far greater. Other locations picked it up, spreading like wildfire. Employees who once felt invisible now had a voice. Struggles that had gone unnoticed were now met with action. But Emily knew that real change wasn't just about big gestures. It was about what happened in the quiet moments. The culture that was shifting, not because corporates said so, but because people were making it happen. That's what made it real, and that's what made it last. One evening, long after her shift had ended, Emily lingered in the restaurant, watching the way people interacted. It was different now. The energy, the camaraderie. A few months ago, everyone had simply done their jobs and left. But now employees stayed after their shifts to help each other. They looked out for one another, checking in, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The impact wasn't just felt internally either. Customers had noticed. Loyalty had skyrocketed. The restaurant wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It was a place where something good was happening, and people wanted to be part of that. That's when Rachel walked in. Emily had seen the change in Rachel the most. When she had first started, Rachel had been exhausted, overworked, running on fumes trying to provide for her daughter while barely scraping by. Now she smiled more. She laughed with her coworkers. She had a future. She walked over to Emily and leaned on the counter. "You know," she said, "this place feels different." Emily smirked. "Yeah," Rachel nodded. "I don't dread coming in anymore." That hit Emily harder than she expected. She swallowed. That's how it should be. Rachel hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. Emily frowned. "What's that?" Rachel slid it across the counter. "Just open it. Curious, Emily tore it open. Inside was a letter, handwritten. Emily's breath hitched as she read the first line. "Dear Emily, I don't think you realize what you've done for us." Her heart pounded as she continued reading. "When you started this program, I thought it was just another corporate stunt. I thought it would disappear like everything else. But it didn't, it grew, and so did we. Because of you, I got the chance to breathe, to provide, to hope. Because of you, I'm going back to school." Emily's eyes widened. Rachel held up a hand. "Let me finish." Emily kept reading. "For the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my future, and I'm not the only one. You gave us something no paycheck ever could. You gave us a reason to believe that people still care." Emily exhaled sharply. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't needed recognition, but reading those words, it made everything worth it. Slowly, she looked up. Rachel's eyes were glassy, but she smiled. "I just thought you should know." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she did the only thing that made sense. She reached across the counter and squeezed Rachel's hand. "You deserve everything that's coming your way," she whispered. Rachel let out a shaky breath and nodded. "So do you." The months turned into a year. The program expanded beyond their wildest dreams. More restaurants, more employees, more lives changed. But the core of it never changed. It was still about people. Emily had gone into this job thinking she'd be managing a restaurant. She hadn't expected to be part of something that would change lives, but that's exactly what happened. And as she stood at the back of the restaurant one evening, watching the place she had helped transform, she realized something. She wasn't just running a restaurant. She was building a community. And that was the greatest reward of all.